Richard Martin of the Cult Popture Podcast. This is AJ from the Cult Popture Podcast talking to you.
Yes, I recognise you from the last 8 years of my life.
Yeah. I reckon this will be one of the least listened to episodes of our series, of our show.
Yeah.
I reckon that there is something about not only the fact that the films we're going to be talking about, the first one is obscure by global standards and the second one is obscure by New Zealand standards. And on top of that, there's not a lot of fun to be had in discussing these.
Yeah.
I just think that this is going to be one of the more alienating episodes. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting one. I can't imagine this is going to be a super long episode, but at the same time, I think that people who are fans of Cult Popture, are fans of AJ from the Cult Popture Podcast, are fans of Richard from the Cult Popture Podcast. Did it to myself.
Damn.
I think there's people enjoy us talking about New Zealand. Like for a lot of our listeners, I think that we're their main exposure to this beautiful little country where nothing bad ever happens at the other side of the world. And
yeah,
I think that I'm just glancing at my notes here, but I think, we're covering 2 New Zealand films today. And so I think that, we're going to be celebrating some of the best parts of Aotearoa, Land of the Long White Cloud.
I sure hope so, Richard. Welcome, everyone, to Film Franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture Podcast, where we cover a different film franchise every fortnight. And this year in particular, we're only doing film franchises with 2 entries. And when we decided on that, I knew that would qualify a certain duology back into the race to be covered on the podcast one day. And that duology is, of course, the 2 Kiwi films, Once Were Warriors and What Becomes of the Broken Hearted.
Yes.
And so we... Okay. Should we just lay it out? Should we...
Yes. Well, yeah. So I mean, I am running this episode, AJ, so don't you bloody get too ahead of yourself there, mate.
I beg your pardon.
So Once Were Warriors, came out in 1994. They're both based on books written by Alan Duff, who also wrote the screenplays for the films. First one's directed by Lee Tamahori, second one by Ian Hume. Just to... Ian Mune, sorry. Just to really get this out of the way up top, pretty severe trigger warning for this episode. Like, these films do deal with some very heavy topics. Like you said, most people aren't really familiar with the second one so much, or at least not these days. But Once Were Warriors, if you know the film, you know it revolves very heavily around domestic violence, which we will be talking about in the episode. There's also a pretty not graphic but pretty harrowing rape scene in the first film that is very key to the plot, and we'll be discussing it here. There's also talk of suicide, a lot of gang violence, and so...
And to top it all off, it's a Māori man's observations and critique of his own Māori culture, something which I don't think the world needs to hear 2 white dudes weigh in on.
Yeah.
So it's literally like watching, like, we've watched heavy films before for Film Franchise Fortnights, but this is the only example where I've gone maybe we can focus on another element instead, so that we're not just talking about all the heavy stuff. And it's like, okay, instead of the domestic violence, would you like to talk about the suicide? There's nowhere to turn.
Yeah, that's
in this
the thing.
franchise.
You say we've done heavy films before, but Once Were Warriors, at least, is probably the heaviest, right?
I think absolutely.
Yeah.
I think this is the heaviest film we've ever had to tiptoe around with our silly little podcast where we make silly little jokes.
Yeah, and your silly little jacket you're wearing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I am wearing
AJ, that's frankly an inappropriate jacket to be wearing.
You're actually right. I'm going to take it off.
It's not
right for the Once More. It's like a 90s.
It looks like the floor of a Pizza Hut in the 90s.
Yeah, a Chuck E. Cheese kind of.
Yeah.
It's a cool jacket. I really like it, but you're right. It is tasteless for the conversation.
I have an unbuttoned flannel. I'm going to button up now because it feels wrong to be bearing my. Although I guess I am.
I probably should have.
Maybe I am bearing my soul, so I should also be bearing my chest.
I should have probably cleaned up my room actually on the Zoom call. Like my closet's open and my bed's unmade. Like I should be wearing a tuxedo.
Well, now that I've been to your house in Christchurch, the veil has been lifted, and I know the squalor you live in, so you're not hiding anything from me now, AJ. But yeah,
that's true.
Once Were Warriors came out in 1994. At the time, was the highest grossing film ever released in New Zealand, beating Jurassic Park. So that's just, to give you some context of like how huge this film is. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But yeah, directed by Lee Tamahori. It's actually not the first Lee Tamahori film we've covered on the podcast.
Correct.
Because what else has he directed?
We know. I'll give the listeners 10 seconds to guess what other Lee Tamahori film we've covered on the podcast. Because unless you remember, you're not going to guess it. It is a wild film to be put alongside Once Were Warriors as the films of his we've covered on the show.
Yeah, while people try to think of that, he also directed Along Came a Spider and Triple X2 State of the Union. So yeah.
A real gun for hire kind of
totally.
Director, I think, outside of his New Zealand films. State of the Triple X2 is eligible for a future.
There's 3 now.
Film franchise Fortnights episode as well.
We couldn't do it this year.
Once we go back. Yeah.
What's the other film
is, of course, the director of Die Another Day, the James Bond film, probably the worst James Bond film. And what I like about sort of New Zealand directors' input into the James Bond franchise is you can very cockily go like, do you know that a Kiwi directed the 2 best James Bond films because Martin Campbell did GoldenEye and Casino Royale, and then you sort of quietly say under your breath, a Kiwi also directed what would probably be agreed to be the worst James Bond film as well. So highs and lows, but hey.
We also did the best and worst Thor film.
There you go. Yeah, by the same guy in this case,
what is Once Were Warriors about, AJ?
What is it about, Richard? Okay, I will refrain from any analysis and just say the events of the film.
Yes.
Spoilers for
don't pick a side, AJ.
Yeah, right. Don't. So spoilers for a movie that I would probably recommend people watch if they are okay with heavy subject matter. But yes, Once Were Warriors follows a South Auckland.
Yes, it was filmed in Otara, which is about half an hour from my house. Just for people who are interested.
Yes, thank you. I'm interested in where Richard lives. I am stalling talking about this movie. It follows a Māori family living in South Auckland, the patriarch of which is a man named Jake Hickey, played by Temuera Morrison, and he is sort of known amongst his community by the nickname Jake the Muss, which we learned in prep for this podcast is obviously referring to the muscle, which you and I both just didn't think about. But he's Jake the Muss, and he is an sort of an alcoholic, very abusive, very angry man. We are shown throughout the film him beating up patrons at the bar that he frequents for like little to no reason. We're shown he is very unwilling to kind of address his own flaws, but very ready to explain why someone else is in the wrong. And he is also a pretty horrific wife beater. Most of the film, I actually hadn't seen this film before covering it for this podcast. All I knew about Once Were Warriors before going in is that it's a film about a wife beater. Like that's essentially what the movie is. There's some pretty harrowing specific scenes we'll get to. He also has his wife, whose name is Beth. Who's she played by?
Rena Owen,
and he's got
who's also in Star Wars. And interestingly,
oh wow, who's she playing Star Wars?
Glupshido, like one of those kind of characters.
Glupshido. She's Glupshido.
But yeah, does the voice of it in Clone Wars and Attack of the Clones, and then is reprised in Clone Wars or something like that.
What a random connection that
Yeah.
Once Were Warriors has Attack of the Clones
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and they've also got a bunch of kids of varying different ages. There's everyone's kind of got a storyline. I'd say the main ones we'll probably talk about would be his oldest daughter Grace, as sort of the takes the spotlight for the character, the characters with the children characters. And then, of course, he's also got a couple of mates that he drinks with, the most relevant of one, also played by the now probably most famous person in the film, Cliff Curtis, who people will recognize from Fear the Walking Dead. He's the main character in that, but he's also in loads and loads of different... He's a character actor who can kind of like fit any non-white race.
The joke is that he's played every enemy of the United States.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll see him play Mexican characters and
Taliban,
Indian characters.
Things,
But he's a Kiwi in real life.
We've only done one Cliff Curtis film before, though. Do you know what it is?
Cliff Curtis? I'm going to guess it's something like Godzilla 98.
Nah, he's in Hobbs and Shaw.
I mean, that's not too far away on the spectrum from from Godzilla 98. A character actor who shows up in a lot of stuff. So
he does have another son who I know why you're dancing around mentioning him, but he is a pretty important character.
Let's say his name is Nige. Let's call him Nige. Short for Nigel, for the sake of this podcast, because I don't want to get into how they pronounce it, or if that's okay, or if we can pronounce it because that's okay. But it sounds like the first half of the N-word, if you haven't picked up what I'm putting down. I don't know why they would call the character this in the first place.
The name isn't derived from the N-word in the film.
Correct.
Or that we know of. And then, of course, there's the other son, who's a major part of the second film, but he seemingly does not exist in the first one.
Which son is that? That's like...
Sonny.
What's his name? Sonny.
Yeah, he's never mentioned, doesn't appear, but he's like the main character of the second film.
He doesn't appear?
Yeah, he's never mentioned. He's not in the first film at all.
God, they just have so many children. I just assumed he was one of them. The main kind of trajectory of the story is like this family dealing with this horrible, horrible man. And about 3/4 of the way through the film, and both are warning again for it. This is spoiling like the major turning point of the film, and also an extremely harrowing scene. Cliff Curtis's character, who is one of Jake's friends, referred to as Uncle Bully throughout the film. He, I don't know how delicately to put this, sneaks into Grace's room one night and rapes her, and what is like an unflinching scene. You know, like it is like you see the entire act take place from two different cameras, you know, two different angles. It doesn't really let you hide from it. It doesn't like cut away or anything. It's just maybe one of the worst, most uncomfortable scenes I've ever seen in anything. And last night I watched like a Where Are They Now documentary, like 50-minute documentary made by the guy that plays Nige. He's a documentary filmmaker now. And they talked about that scene in it, and they were talking about Lee Tamahori was like, we knew going into that scene that it was 2 shots and you get 1 take of each shot and then you're done. You know, so they only filmed it once because it was just so horrible for everyone.
Yeah, because I think the actress was only 16 or 17. The character's 13 in the scene, but yeah, it's a very horrible to watch. The
result of this winds up being Grace hangs herself in the back garden, and this is sort of the push that Beth Jake's wife needs to finally decide she is going to leave Jake, and there is this breathtaking title drop at the end of this film where she's taking the kids and she's getting in the car and he's like following her out of the pub after they've just outed Cliff Curtis, Uncle Bully.
They found one of
rapist pedophile
Grace's diaries where she talked about it, and
and she sort of looks at him and she says, "Our people once were warriors." And I won't try and remember the rest of the speech, but basically the sentiment put forward at the end of the film is like a Māori. Oh God, I'm so hoping that I am accurately conveying this message that I have not been able to observe. But it is like Māori looking at Māori and being like, "Look what you've become. Like, look at how far you have come from like the traditions and the standards and the
mana,
like love that the mana exactly that was once like so that made our people so proud. Like, you are a joke, you are like a pathetic representation of this." And it's so fucking hard to talk about from our perspective, right? Because I don't know that. I don't want to make any judgment calls, but there was a moment that really stuck with me in the film where they're talking about burying Grace at the marae that Beth's character like sort of is from, like that from her old family that she left because they didn't like Jake, but she gave them up to marry Jake. She's talking about burying Grace over there, and Jake talks about like gets real angry and is like, "Oh, they think they're better than us." And I was like, God, we're like, I've never been privy to this. I've never been like, because why would I have been privy to like the class divide, or not even class divide, but like moral divide between the community of spiritual divide between the community of Māori itself, you know, like, because I would like to think you and I are both well-meaning advocates against like, you know, we want to decolonize New Zealand. We have like a heart in the right place for all these people. I am nowhere near a place in society to criticize a culture, you know, like a divide within a culture, which is why after watching this film, I was like,
finally, I'm qualified to talk about this.
It's so full on, but it's such a good movie. It is so well told. And the documentary really gave me this kind of sense that everyone involved was doing this because it needed to be done.
It's important.
Doing this because this piece of art needed to be given to the world, and there was not a sense of pride or even like artistic enjoyment from it. Like Lee Tamahori talks about like being given the job and being like, oh my God, like someone has to do this, and it may as well be me because I've been involved in the production. So yeah, truly like a really like important and very selfless on behalf of the actors involved, I think, film.
Because I think because the book was obviously a pretty landmark book when it came out, and so an adaptation of that is like, but you've got this source material that's like, we've got to do right by that, and then obviously, you know, folding in all the cultural and also the tone more than anything as well.
And so they talked about the book in this doco as well, and one of the things that they say in the doco is that the book was really popular with Pākehā, so with white people, for all our non-New Zealanders, but Māori weren't reading it. This is the word said in the doco, that Māori weren't reading the book, and so the movie was actually like part of why they felt it was so important to adapt was to make it in the like Māori zeitgeist and not just the which is super interesting as well, because it's totally problematic if this like harrowing examination of culture is only being read by, you know, the white elite who can be like, oh wow, we really
I didn't realize they were all like this. But so I hadn't seen this film before either. Like you mentioned last episode that it's like a bit of a pop cultural blind spot for you, and it was the same for me as well. But it is this very funny thing that my only exposure to, I mean, well, we'll talk about this in a moment, about where this sort of sits in the pantheon of pop culture in New Zealand. But my only exposure to the story of Once Were Warriors really is about a year or two after I left high school. I went back to my high school to watch a play of Once Were Warriors. And at the time, I was like, I don't remember a lot of it. I specifically remember the suicide happening, and that was when I learned that there was a suicide in Once Were Warriors. And so I remember part of me being like, I wish they hadn't been spoiled because I will watch this movie someday. And now, 13 years later, I have watched it. But now watching the film, and I mean, like, within 10, 15 minutes, there's a pretty violent scene where Jake beats up Beth, and then it cuts before anything happens, but it implied that he rapes her. And I was just like, how the fuck did I watch a high school performance of this? How did they do this? What the fuck? And so...
No, I when you told me that as well, and like, we live in Christchurch.
Yeah, well, I don't anymore, but I was in Christchurch, yes. And also, like, 2011 Christchurch too.
A bad place to be when you're an aspiring white actor and your school is putting on a play with virtually no white people in it. Do you remember if there were any, like...
I don't remember. I seem to remember the girl playing Grace was Māori and very good. Like, that's more or less all I remember about the play is the suicide scene.
Because how could you tell the story if the entire cast aren't Māori?
Yeah.
How how?
Yeah.
This is what's so curious to me about you going to a high school production. I'll say it. This is too heavy for a high school production. It is irresponsible to make your high school do it.
AJ. So there's an interesting thing, and because I've been trying to think all week about, like, what the American or, like, the global equivalent of this film is, and this franchise really. And in talking about, like, where the first film sits in the pantheon of pop culture to where the second one sits, the closest thing I could think of was Chinatown and the Two Jakes. That, like, Chinatown is, Roman Polanski aside, it's oft considered one of the greatest films of all time. It's this very important piece of cinema. And then at the time, the Two Jakes wasn't a bomb necessarily. It didn't people were aware of its existence at the time. But now it's very much like, did you know that Chinatown has a sequel? And I think Once Were Warriors, it's everyone has heard of this film, at least knows the name Jake the Muss. But What Becomes of the Brokenhearted was actually a pretty successful film at the time, both critically and financially, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But just no one talks about it these days. And I guess partly because it's not as good as the first one, which we'll talk about, but also that it's like the first one's just such a complete story that, But it is an interesting thing watching this film, and because you and I both know going into Once Were Warriors, it's a heavy film. It's about domestic violence. Like you said, that's, if you don't know anything else about the film, that's probably the main thing you know. And so you expect a heavy film, but I think you don't, from the way people talk about it, you don't quite grasp how heavy it is. Because Jake the Muss is a famous character in New Zealand cinema. People know who he is. People do impressions of him, whether they should or not.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is Jake? If you imagine, like, how people maybe talk about, like, who's a international equivalent, like it's a character people know probably more than they probably don't even know this character is from Once Were Warriors necessarily. Like he is an archetype, a pop cultural figure in New Zealand.
Archetypes are good, but he represents a certain kind of person that, to be honest, appears in the news a lot. And that, like, there are still Jake the Muss types out there. And yeah, it's a harsh reality of the country that we live in that's not talked about on the global stage a lot. But yeah, I mean, like Taika Waititi has called it out in interviews and stuff, saying New Zealand is fucking racist, and we also we have a horrible domestic violence problem. But
I mean, so this is probably a good time to bring up the opening shot of Once for Warriors.
Fantastic shot.
It kind of tells you the whole story in one image, where it opens on this like pristine New Zealand landscape. What you Americans listening will probably be picturing when you think
you
of
stupid
New Zealand.
fucking Americans.
Yeah. And then it slowly zooms out, and we're actually looking at like a petrol billboard that just happens to be a shot of New Zealand mountain range, and then it pans down to like a highway in South Auckland where this billboard's up.
Well, we would call it a motorway, but yeah.
A motorway, and it just looks like shit, and it's dirty and gross, and
it's all graffito tagged.
Yeah, and it's about like there is a part of the Once a Warriors story that is like this. We once were warriors. We once had this beautiful land, and look how far it has slipped, and look at where the standard is now. And it's kind of like, it's a pretty fucking genius piece of cinematography.
Yeah, it's incredible. I remember that being talked about, and Sam Neill narrates a documentary called Cinema of Despair, which is about just how fucking dark New Zealand films are. Cinema of Unease, sorry. And
I've wanted to watch that for years.
They talk about, and they reference that shot, and I was like, oh, that's great. But it is funny that like, and I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but like we had this reputation for like, yeah, New Zealand makes fucking dark films. And now you think of a New Zealand filmmaker, think of New Zealand films, and you're like, well, obviously Captain Wacky himself, Taika Waititi. And yeah, like we're now Cinema of Whack, which is an interesting change.
Totally.
But then you look at, I mean, even Taika Waititi's films that we have a tendency to get, some people would say, a little too serious, even in our comedy films. That's more of a local observation than one that the rest of the globe makes about us. But yeah,
I also don't think that's exclusive to New Zealand films. I think it was a popular trend in indie drama comedies.
True, which is all we can afford to make.
Of the time that Boy came out. Yeah. No, exactly. That's such a genuinely good observation we've just reached. I think I did not expect to come up with something like that on the Once Warriors episode. But I think that's actually so true. It's like New Zealand is so limited in its resource sometimes that we're forced into like making that kind of thing.
Yeah. It is interesting. So like you earlier in the week, and I'm not sure if you want to stand by this or not, but you said that Jake the Muss is
going well.
Is kind of like a Joker or Tyler Durden figure in New Zealand.
Yeah, so I do want to talk about this.
And you do stand by it?
Okay. No, I never did stand by. What I'm saying is, the whole thing about like how the biggest fans of Fight Club fundamentally misunderstand Fight Club, and the dorm room poster culture of like thinking Tyler Durden is the person you're supposed to admire in Fight Club, whereas Tyler Durden is actually the antithesis of the film's thesis, right? I think it is true of Jake the Muss in a much more catastrophic way, because again, I've known about Once Warriors as a film for as long as I can remember, but never saw it, right?
Yeah.
So I remember in like primary school, people talking about Once Warriors, people talking about Jake the Muss, and people talking about Jake in the same way that these dorm room dudes talk about Tyler Durden or Joker. Like there was an admiration there of this like cool, tough, badass character. There's a very famous line in this film where he, just before he beats up his wife for not making their pedophile friend some eggs, where he says, make the man some fucking eggs, cook the man some fucking eggs, which is like a cultural touchstone in New Zealand. You can say that line that is unambiguously used within the context of domestic abuse in a harrowing New Zealand picture, and people will
get a laugh
because you've made
no matter what, you will get a laugh.
If you say cook the man some fucking eggs, people go, ha ha, yeah, like that funny movie Once Warriors.
Yeah.
So like there is a I don't think it's as damaging when people do this with Tyler Durden or Joker, because those are theatrical, like exaggerated characters, whereas this is like a movie that has zero jokes in it, and a movie that does not want you to feel good after watching it. You know, for all Fight Club and Joker's like dark themes, they are still, I feel comfortably saying, like, entertainment. I don't like Once for Warriors feels like a soul expansion. It doesn't feel like I'm watching it to enjoy it, you know. And it's real weird. I think it's real weird that Cook the Man Some Fucking Eggs has become a like catchphrase that we could all have a little chortle.
It's our frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
That's exactly what it is.
It's interesting because you made that comparison. You messaged me that before I'd seen the film, and then watching the film, I was like, I think that like Jake the Muss is a worse person than both of those characters too. Like,
I agree.
I think he's probably one of, if not the most reprehensible character we've ever covered on the podcast. Because you think about...
I'll do you one better, Richard. In film history, potentially, right? Like a character whose entire... Like, he's the main character of the film, but he is the bad guy as well. Like, Beth is the protagonist. And Jake is given so many opportunities to change his behavior and never does until the final scene, where it kind of just, the film is saying like, well, he's doomed. He is doomed because he is unwilling to change.
I want to talk about this final scene, but the other thing, what I was sort of saying about that is like, you think about some of the characters who are from the podcast that we've covered that are, you know, the biggest villain, your Thanoses, we haven't covered them, but Tyler Durden, Joker, but like, all of these the best villains, like have some sort of a code. They have some sort of a goal or a line they're not willing to cross, or a reason that they believe what they're doing. Or, so I guess something like the Joker somewhat has, arguably has a code in some of his versions, but like, the Joker being an agent of chaos is also what makes him compelling. And there's like a character element to that. Jake the Muss is just a fuckwit. Like, he doesn't believe in anything. There's no rhyme or reason to like when he will pick a fight and when he won't. But yeah, so the end of the film is Beth finds this diary from Grace, which talks about her rape from Uncle Bully, and
what's great about it as well is that diary is actually just a book of stories she writes, and she is shown throughout the film reading stories, and then they find it and they're like, oh, read us a story, Beth. I always loved Grace's stories.
It's not actually a diary.
And she opens to a random page and I loved that, because I recently watched something I did not like, which I don't want to, it's not that big of a spoil, but like, characters' secrets are found out because the character happens to keep a diary. And I thought it was so annoying, because it was like, don't fucking write this down. Don't write this shit down, because you'll get in trouble. And the character does get in trouble. And but in this, it's presented in such a better, more organic way. I thought it was such a good way to reveal.
So, and also that like Jake keeps telling her not to write, that she's wasting her time learning to write, essentially. He rips the book in half as well. But when Beth finds it and they're like, read us a story, she, all color drains from her face. She has this look of horror, and then goes to the bar where Jake is drinking with his two friends, Uncle Bully and probably the best character in the film.
The nicest person in the movie.
Yeah, this one dude in Jake's crew who's always like, come on, man. Like, he only has like half a dozen lines. It is like he's complicit in a lot of it,
he's culpable.
Like he's one of the good cops sort of thing, but doesn't do anything to stop. But it is just like funny that like everyone is so reprehensible, but there's this one guy that's like, oh, guys, come on. do we need to do this? Yeah.
Oh, come on, Jake. How about we talk about it?
So she shows up to the bar, says, right in Uncle Bully's face, says, you fucking raped a 13-year-old girl. Jake tries to, threaten her to leave, and then eventually Jake reads the book and sees the truth, and beats the ever living shit out of Uncle Bully. I didn't notice it, but Wikipedia says he castrates him, which
he fucking stomps on his dick. I don't know.
Yeah, well, he breaks
castration by clinical means. But...
it's shot from the back, but he breaks a bottle and then stabs him, I guess, on the dick. Yeah, like beats him within an inch of his life, and it's interesting because I think the film. And this is a little bit of a shortcoming of the film, I think, that it's not framed enough to me. Like, you get this as an audience member, you can get it, but the film isn't framed enough as, like, this isn't going to bring your daughter back. And this...
You think it's too cathartic?
Yeah, I think there's a bit... Because also there's a couple of moments where it's like, oh, they're about to find out, and like the movie also just ends. Like it ends very quickly, and also old films like that have very quick credits, and so there was only like 10 minutes to go on the film. It was wrapping up, and I was like, are they fucking not going to find out what Uncle Bully did? And so because there was a part of me, obviously a part of you as an audience member that wants to see them find out, wants him to get what's coming to him. And then I think that, like we said, people watching Fight Club and getting the wrong thing from Tyler Durden, I think there is, because Bully getting the shit beaten out of him in such a drawn out, such a violent sequence. And it's also like arguably, going the wrong way about it, but Jake doing the right thing, like taking the side of his family for the first time in the film. I think that it is just a bit too much of a fuck yeah moment, and I think that people will watch that and think of that as a fuck yeah moment.
So yeah, it presents like Jake as like a necessary force of evil, perhaps, because if there's one character more reprehensible than Jake in this film, it's Uncle Bully, right? However, I agree that it is in danger of that, but the very next scene is Jake as if he has won back a reason to be let back into his family, being told, no, you actually enabled this. Like this is part of your like doing. I looked up the full quote with the title drop. I'll read it here. Beth says, our people once were warriors, but unlike you, Jake, they were people with mana, pride with spirit. If my spirit can survive living with you for 18 years, then I can survive anything.
Yeah.
It's pretty tear-jerking stuff there. But I hear what you're saying, but I do wonder if I were to defend it, I guess I would say that the message perhaps is that violence begetting violence will not solve your problem, you know?
Yeah, it is interesting because it's like Beth is the heart of the film, and you ultimately want to see her leave Jake. And it's like, it's just about who's it's framed around in that last scene, because you get the catharsis of him being beaten up, but then her leaving him, and like, it's kind of what the whole next film is about, really, but like, not enough of him being like, oh, I've done this and I've still lost everything, you know?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like, I don't know how you would go about fixing this minor issue I have for the film, but yeah, it's just very much like, I can see why audience members less intelligent than you or I would watch that and be like, oh, it's cool how Jake comes through for his family at the end. And that's where the sort of the violence that we talk about, that in primary school or in elementary school, grade school, whatever, you hear people talk about Jake the Muss in that way, that like that it's something to aspire to being that strong.
And I mean, to cut them some slack as well, it's probably also because it was just like a significant New Zealand.
It's our one piece of pop culture,
character. Yeah, like I think like part of it as well might be that this very much like this is why we have Temuera Morrison playing Boba Fett, right? Like is this movie, because before Once Warriors, he was on Shortland Street, which for those outside of New Zealand is literally our Coronation Street,
the soap
right down
opera,
to
yeah.
the title being basically the same thing. And in this documentary I watched, there was like quite a struggle to get Tim like cast as Jake the Muss, because people were like, "Well, you mean Dr. Rupata is going to be in your like big budget New Zealand film?" Like there was not a lot of faith, and Temuera Morrison talks about it. He says like, "Yeah, everyone doubted me," and he basically used the frustration he felt knowing that he could be fired midway through production. He used that to fuel, like to draw anger from, and just use that to even more intensify his performance, because we've spoken before about being critical of Temuera Morrison's abilities to act in things like Star Wars or
the
Aquaman.
DC movies, yeah.
But like, he is really good in this. He is like, I feel comfortable saying without any pushback that this is the best performance of his career. Like, I think he would probably agree with that. Like it is just. It is. So, I would hate that. Everyone in this like Cliff Curtis in this documentary was just like, didn't want to do it. Like no one fucking wanted to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially playing Uncle Bully, you'd be like,
Yeah.
I read that he had to get talked into it by like his auntie and his mum or something like that. Yeah.
No, yeah, his another the kid who played Boogie, his mother was dying. And when he got cast, he said to his mum, "I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stay with you." And in the documentary, he's like, and then my mum went, like does like a slap around the face like gesture, and his mum was like, "Don't be fucking stupid. Like this is if you don't do this, then this is all for nothing." And so she died 2 weeks before production, meaning that kid is freshly grieving the death of his mother on screen. So all these terrible circumstances kind of like it's like the thing of like, if you want to be president, you shouldn't be president. It's like, this is such a powerful piece of film because everyone in it looks kind of pissed off that they're having to plumb the depths of humanity to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, a piece of not necessarily dumb IMDb trivia, but talking about that, Temuera Morrison. There was a lot of concerns that he would be too small to play the part of Jake the Muss. It says he spent weeks in the gym training under the supervision of fight coordinator Robert Bruce, and he consumed whole chickens in order to beef up for the role. Like
raw chickens
and hot chickens,
living chickens.
He ate them whole as well. Like, but yeah, it was very very critically well received film as well. It was recently in was it Viola Davis's top 4 on Letterboxd?
Viola Davis listed as one of her 4 favorites.
She said like a foreign film called Once Were Warriors, and I've never heard it referred to as a foreign film.
Yeah. She goes from New Zealand and then gives the wrong year that it came out in or something like that.
Famous film reviewer Roger Ebert gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, and a quote from him here said, "Once Were Warriors has been praised as an attack on domestic violence and abuse, so it is. But I'm not sure anyone needs to see this film to discover that such brutality is bad. We know that. I value it for 2 other reasons. Its perception in showing the way alcohol triggers sudden personality shifts, and its power in presenting 2 great performances by Morrison and Owen. You don't often see acting like this in the movies. They bring the Academy Awards into perspective."
Because Rena Owen in this documentary that I keep drawing back to because I was desperate for something to talk about that was useful,
lighthearted,
when talking about this. She talks about how she, when preparing for the role, she went and talked to a survivor of domestic abuse, and she's like, "I have one question. Why did you stay with him?" And she said that this woman said to her, "Because I loved him." And it's like, fuck. God, that's so heartbreaking. And then in the film, there is so much time to take in to show you the tenderness and the love that these characters do actually share in between these harrowing moments that you get it. Like,
Yeah.
I believe what she goes into that film needing to present a woman who is in love with this man despite everything. And she does a fucking awesome job of communicating such a specific thing.
Yeah. Also, that exchange is in the second film as well. But
Yes, true.
I put on the film and about 5 minutes in, I was like, I messaged you, I said, I don't think the acting is very good in this film. I didn't really think much of any of the performances. But I will say that there's a very natural sort of element to, especially just the two lead performances of Timur Morrison and Rena Owen, that I think it's a double-edged sword, being that like naturalistic, that there are certain scenes that like just very light dialogue scenes. It's always this weird thing where it's like those feel forced because they're being so natural, like because they're so believable in the big scenes that the small scenes, I don't even know how to describe it, but like there was just a few little conversation scenes early on where I was like, this feels a little stilted. But then when they're actually doing the hard stuff,
if that's just the cultural cringe thing though, if it's seeing familiar accents delivering movie dialogue.
No, I don't think that's it. I think part of it as well.
No,
AJ. That I think as well that also maybe that like those two actors are clearly a lot stronger than the rest of the cast. That there's a couple of scenes where you can tell that they're carrying the other actor.
Who do you think is? Because I think Cliff Curtis is incredible in this movie, and I thought that the girl playing Grace was pretty fucking good as well. Like, is it more just the children? Because that's probably more because they're children. than anything
maybe.
Else, right?
But it's interesting it brings the Academy Awards into perspective, and you don't often see acting like this in movies. But I mean, Rena Owen is one of our best actors. Last year or the year before, she was in the biopic of Fenna Cooper, Dame Fenna Cooper, who was one of the New Zealand greats. And I have a little bone to pick, not with that film. The time that were fucking annoying that happened to me. When I was doing it's Fenna, like it's Whina, which would normally be pronounced Fenna, but Fenna Cooper herself pronounced it Finna, I think. And it's her at three different stages of her life, and almost like Moonlight sort of thing with the casting. And Rena Owen plays her at the older stage of her life. And so the movie is just called Fenna, and it's about Dame Fenna Cooper. And I wrote a review for it, and there must have been a time in the review when I just referred to her as Fenna Cooper, because whoever subbed my review, whoever checked it before it went up, clearly hit Control F, find and replace Fenna, and put it with Dame Fenna. And so every single time in that review that I mention the name of the film, I've now said the name wrong, because it looks like I'm referring to the movie as being called Dame Fenna, but it's not called that. And so I didn't notice it for a few days. And then by that point, I'd just lost when my time at TVNZ doing reviews was just a series of battles, and I must have just lost one because I was like, I'm fucked fixing this. So anyway, if you find my review for the film, that wasn't my fault. All right, are you ready to move on to What Becomes of the Brokenhearted?
I sure am, Richard. You might have to help me in describing what it's about, because this one doesn't.
You want me to say You want me to say the kid's name? Is that what you're asking?
No, no. But this one just doesn't stick with you as much as the first one.
Yeah.
What Becomes of the Brokenhearted?
Well, AJ, I'm going to stop you there and actually do some poorly placed, useless statistics.
Very poorly placed. Nice, interrupting me.
Yeah. So, you asked me to look this up. That we mentioned how relatively obscure What Becomes of the Brokenhearted is. According to Letterboxd, where you can sort by film popularity, which is just how many people have logged it. What Becomes of the Brokenhearted is the 8th most obscure film we've watched for the podcast. Can you give me the 7 that fall below it?
Okay. Can I start like a little bit?
I thought you were going to be like, have I seen them?
Kind of.
Yes.
Can I go like on a macro lens and you maybe like lead me to the right answers?
No.
Potentially. Okay.
No, sure.
So I would think that our most obscure films would be these like probably aimed at children straight to DVD sequels. So are we talking? Are there any Beethoven movies in this bottom?
There is one Beethoven movie. The 7th is the Beethoven movie.
Which is it'll be what? Treasure Tale?
It is Treasure Tale.
Yep. Well, because it's not going to be any of the numbered sequels, I don't think. Okay, I'm going to guess the like Nutty Professor sequel, the animated Nutty Professor sequel.
Yep, from 2008 with Drake Bell. That is the 4th most obscure film we've covered.
I am going to guess perhaps the rest is just filled out with Earbud spin-offs.
Not quite the rest, but yeah.
How many are there? How many earbuds are there?
There's no earbuds technically, but there is.
So pup stars.
All 3 pup stars are more obscure than What Becomes of the Brokenhearted. So, yeah. So 6th most obscure is Pup Star, and 3rd most obscure is Better Together, and 2nd most obscure is World Tour. So you're still to guess the most obscure film we've ever covered and the 5th most obscure film we've ever covered.
Okay, the 5th most obscure film we'll have ever covered will be one of the Mummy sequels from the 60s.
No.
Or the 50s and 60s. No? Okay. It will be... Is it a Disney sequel?
No.
Is it a sequel?
Yes.
Okay. Is it a kids movie?
Yes, but I'll give you the clue. It's not from a kids franchise necessarily.
But it is a kids movie.
Yeah.
Is it Look Who's Talking Now?
No, I would say it's a kids franchise.
I wouldn't. I'd say it's a kid. I actually think that was an amazing application of the parameters you gave because that's a kid-friendly sequel in a franchise that otherwise is not particularly.
This one is a much more distinct outlier in this franchise.
Is it Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure? No, that's Disney. I don't know. You're gonna have to give me them.
It's the animated Medea's Tough Love.
That is interesting. So obscure, I can't recall a single frame.
Yeah, and the fans can't go back and listen to the episode. You still, what is the most obscure film we've ever covered? This is why I guessed this before I saw it.
Oh, is it Sleepaway Camp 5?
No, there is no Sleepaway Camp 5.
4.
Yeah, it's not 4, but this is. You and I have talked many times, and this will give it away, but you and I have talked many times about when all these things of like, oh, did you know this has a sequel? And it's like, you cannot surprise me with like an addition to a franchise. I am never amazed to learn that something has a sequel or is a sequel or whatever. But there was one...
Legally Blonde?
No, but there was... I knew about Legally Blondes, but there was one that both you and I were like, when we covered it. And had to add.
Is it the original Meet the Parents? It is the original Meet the Parents,
yeah.
That's the most obscure film we've seen. Yeah. And that's not a sequel. Yeah. That's bananas, right? That's crazy. If I would have bet my life that the most obscure film we've seen for the podcast is a sequel. But the fact that it's a podcast about sequels is irrelevant to that stat.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Far out. That's crazy.
If you're interested in where Once Were Warriors sits in our like obscurity meter, it's just above Star Trek Insurrection and just below The Girl Who Played with Fire.
At what number?
It's on like page 7. I'm not counting
yeah,
out of
page 7.
Yeah, which out of what's about to be 900 films that we will have watched for the podcast.
True.
Just to keep doing fun games in the middle of our podcast, our very harrowing podcast, can you name the top 5 most popular films we've ever covered? As someone who works at Letterboxd, this should just be information ready to go at the top of your head.
Yeah. So the most popular would be Barbie, then?
That is incorrect. We haven't covered it for the podcast.
Oh, sorry. I mean, it's got to be like the Avengers movies.
There are 2 Avengers movies in the top 5.
Then Lord of the Rings? No, Lord of the Rings isn't in the top 5, is it?
No.
Or it is?
It's not.
It's not. Harry Potter?
Nope.
Because I know that the most logged films on Letterboxd are like Parasite and like that kind. Like they're slightly higher brow movies than the ones we cover.
What the top one is the intersection of that and the Avengers, I guess. Or superheroes. It's also maybe one that you've forgotten we covered.
Oh, no. I've forgotten the most popular film we've covered on the podcast.
Well, it's something that you wouldn't immediately think, oh, yes, we covered that for the podcast.
Because we would have seen it anyway.
Just you sort of, yeah.
Is that why?
There's kind of another reason, but yeah.
I'm losing this. You're going to have to reveal.
The most popular one is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
Because when I think of us covering Spider-Man, I don't think about the fact that we also did Venom and that when we did the Redux. Then second is Infinity War, 5th is Endgame. There are 2 other ones. If you want to guess, you're not beholden to that. But they're also kind of like, I mean, they're very letterboxy. But 3rd most popular film we've covered is Silence of the Lambs, and 4th is Kill Bill Volume 1.
We would have actually been here for 20 minutes. If we were covering those answers. I would have never guessed them. That actually surprises me to learn that those 2 are that high.
Yeah,
up.
this is according to Letterboxd on our stats. These are the 7th and 8th films, New Zealand films we've covered. Do you know what the first 6 are?
So the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings trilogies.
Correct, yeah. And so the first like truly New Zealand films we've watched because the financing from overseas, yada yada, and international actors, etc. But it is the 4th and 5th Timawera Morrison films we've covered. Can you name the other 3? And they are like the fun. It's a very Timawera Morrison 3 films.
Yeah. So he's in a Scorpion King sequel?
Yes, he's in the 3rd one. Can you give me the title?
Rise for Power?
Battle for Redemption is the one
Quest for Battle for Redemption. He is in From Dusk Till Dawn 3.
Which is called?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
I couldn't tell you what it's called.
There's no way in hell I would have remembered this. It's called From Dusk Till Dawn 3, The Hangman's Daughter.
Is it really interesting?
Yeah.
How fun.
We've also seen him once this year. Already.
Really? Yeah. In Rio.
No.
In Crank 2.
No.
High Voltage. Is he in one of the Speed movies?
Yes.
Is he in Speed 2 Cruise Control?
Yes. There you go.
Okay, I lock that in there.
Nice. Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean, that's a great grab bag of the kind of movies you'll see Timawera Morrison in, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Anything is the answer.
Yeah. All right. What Becomes of the Broken Hearted? This came out in 1999, also based on a novel. The novel came out in 96, so interesting. The novel came out after the movie. So one of these like...
So it's a Lost World situation.
Yeah, write another book so we can make another movie. This one was directed by...
That makes a lot of sense. It does feel like that in retrospect.
This one was directed by Ian Mune, who also directed Came a Hot Friday, which is like a classic New Zealand film. I don't think I asked you what the first one has in Rotten Tomatoes.
95.
93%. What do you think this one has?
14.
It doesn't have a Rotten Tomatoes
No,
score.
it won't be that low.
Yeah. It only has one.
Yeah, it's
one
the
review.
8th most obscure film
Yeah.
we've watched for the podcast. It will not have a Rotten
It only
Tomatoes
has one review, and from Dom Wilmot, it's a negative review, and it's like, Rotten Tomatoes does like a summary. It just says somewhat unnecessary.
Somewhat. Yeah.
What's this one about?
So, What Becomes of the Brokenhearted? It takes place. It came out in 1999, and I think it takes place about 6 years later. Jake is completely estranged from his family, but is brought back to them when he receives the news that his eldest son, Nige, has been killed in a gang-related crime. Gang-related shooting, and he attends his funeral where he sees his family again, sees Beth, sees his kids, where they basically say, "Hey, not only are you to blame for your son getting into gangs and ultimately being killed, we'll also
But we also don't think you're cool."
Yeah, we also think that you are somewhat responsible for Grace's death from the first film, and we're not really afraid to tell you that to your face now. So it is kind of presented as a poorly structured redemption story for Jake, where he sort of slowly comes to terms with like how people see him and ultimately saves one of his other sons from a gang shootout in the final scene, and then the movie cuts you off with credits.
Yeah.
The movie is cut off with credits. That's how quick they arrive.
Yeah, it's the sort of the main driving force of the plot is that Sonny, who's the Jake's son, who's not mentioned or doesn't appear in the first film, wants to get revenge for Nigel's death, and Jake wants to step in and stop him. But yeah, like it's stuff like he gets kicked out of his regular pub for starting too many fights, so he goes to a different one, and they're just like, dude, like that shit don't fly here. But yeah, it was funny. I was watching this film, and one of my cats knocked something over or picked something up, and I paused the film to put it back, and it had 90 seconds to go, and I was like, how? And then it turns out that like the next shot was the last one, and then it just cut to credits.
What did you think of this movie?
Yeah, I think it's not as good. Like, it's not as good. Let's just get that out of the way. It's also watching it on YouTube, which that's available for free on YouTube. That someone's ripped it. It's in what would it be, like 12p? There's probably more pixels in one frame of Once Were Warriors than there are in this entire film. But that also it suffers from that. But
when we announced that this was the next franchise, the same guy in our Discord who suggested I watch the Blade Runner movies in the cinema when they were screening in Christchurch suggested I rented the DVD of this so that I could be the first person in the world to watch this movie on a PS5, which I think is probably that's probably accurate. And once again, Skippy Williamson / Ben, I've let you down. Stop telling me to leave my house to do this shit. I can't do it. This is work. This is not leisure. I do not want to leave the house for Cult Popture anymore. It has become something I do in the office.
The cinema near me that I was gonna maybe spoil a future franchise, but I won't. I saw a film there last night, but they're playing Blade Runner with like a live synth soundtrack being played alongside it next Saturday.
That's cool.
So I really want to go to that. So maybe I will, much like Jake in What Becomes of the Brokenhearted, I will redeem Cult Popture and go see that. But yeah, so
do you think he is redeemed?
No, so this is what I want to talk about. It's just there's a segue to get back into the film. So I've known about What Becomes of the Brokenhearted for a long time. This wasn't a shock to me to learn that there was one. Like, Once Warriors just feels like living in New Zealand is part of my DNA, but like I've known about What Becomes of the Brokenhearted for pretty much as long as I can remember as well.
I remember discovering the Wikipedia page for it. I don't know when. I just remember being on a computer and being like, what the hell?
For some reason, it could be just the sort of the poetic nature of the title, the fact that I think I knew like this one's really Jake's story, whereas the first one's the family. For some reason, I just in my head it was always like a redemption story, because I also don't think I comprehended quite how irredeemable he is in the first film. And then after watching the first film, I was like, I don't want to watch this redemption story for this guy. He doesn't deserve it. Like, I don't want to see him be redeemed. And then I had the idea, why do I think it's a redemption story? I don't know what I'm basing that on. But yeah, there is, similar to him finally beating up Uncle Bully at the end, and it's like, oh, he did quote unquote the right thing. I think it is the plot of this film of like saving his other son from going down the same path as quote unquote Nige. He, like, it is just it's a film about him. Is he finally going to do one thing right? And he does, and whether or not that's any kind of redemption is, I guess, open for interpretation. But yeah, there is a third book as well, which is, we're getting into Continue the Franchise territory here. But I think maybe that explains a little bit further, like the fallout of the first two films.
I am so excited to talk about the third book and Continue the Franchise, but let's talk about Brokenhearted for a little bit more. I think that this movie is like nowhere near as good as the first one. But what I will say about it is I didn't think it was particularly bad. I think that what I think is so fascinating about it is it's one of these sequels similar to T2, where it's like, let's just be a fly on the wall with these characters years down the track and see what they're like now. And so in that respect, I did not find this, until maybe the last act, I did not find the story of Jake the Muss to be inorganic to what I would have expected.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, this feels kind of like where he would be. Like, he's got his own new little community now. He's got another girlfriend now. And
who he forces himself on.
Yeah. And she kicks him out when he tries to attack her.
What, he smashes up her living room.
No fear of
and he cut his hand while doing that. And do you know what, AJ? He kept acting. That's why he looks at his hand a few times throughout the film.
Yeah, I think that like it's all, it's very funny to still include, not very funny. It's interesting, I guess, to
it's a little
still
funny,
include a domestic abuse scene in the movie you're billing as a redemption story for the character as well, just to freshly remind you. But in this case, she basically is just like, get the fuck out of my house. Like, no, I am not going to be someone else for you to beat up, basically.
Yeah.
But all of this just the sad, forgotten life where everyone distances themselves from him. It's like, that's probably what his life would be like. And so I appreciated and thought it was interesting to peek in on what he's up to all these years later. But it is also equally as interesting how much of the cast return for this movie, right? Because it's pretty much everyone. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And there is part of me...
We don't see... important to know, we don't see Uncle Bully. He's not mentioned again or anything as well. So he may have died from his injuries. We don't know.
But it's interesting to see someone like Rena Owen back when it's like you gave this like once in a lifetime powerhouse performance in Once for Warriors, a movie that's legacy will like carry on for probably centuries to come, right? And then it's this like obscure sequel that's like, nah, it's not very good and it's not very memorable and doesn't really offer all that much to the story. And like part of me is like, it's kind of sad to see like Rena Owen back and be like Temuera Morrison, as established, will do anything. So I'm not surprised to see he agreed to this. But I think it's very telling that in the documentary I watched about the first film, that was made, or at least it was uploaded to YouTube in 2014. And by the ages of the characters.
It's from 2014. About that. Yeah. It's a 20-year thing.
Yeah, so in that, guess how many times what becomes of the brokenhearted is brought up or mentioned at all?
1,000.
Never once.
Wow.
They act like it doesn't exist, which is the closest they get to talking about it is that they're like, we're now going to see Temuera Morrison, who hasn't seen any like the rest of the cast in over 20 years. And it's like, that's all we really get that like indicates. Although would he have?
No, yeah,
in
because in 1999, which is 15 years earlier.
Oh, so they just blatantly ignore it then. Like they literally pretend the movie doesn't exist. And it's the same, and again, to encroach on continue the franchise, not to say we need to we don't need to dwell on what becomes of the brokenhearted a little more. Like, my first, can we move on to continue the franchise? Sorry, I've accidentally segued into it, but we don't have to if you've got more to say. Brokenhearted.
I was just going to say, really, that like I mentioned earlier, it was actually a critical success. Nick Grant of On Film Magazine said it was a sequel that equals, and said it's maybe better than the original.
Oh, honey. Oh, sweetheart. No.
But then
you never make those statements when you're reviewing a movie as it comes out.
Yeah. But then, interestingly, this is an IMDb trivia quote, but it says the film's failure to live up to the high standards of Once Were Warriors is partly attributed to the fact that polygram filmed entertainment was involved. This meant that the raw emotion of the main characters and the more powerful Māori cultural themes were replaced with a more generic theme of gangland warfare.
That's so true. That's such a, like, that's what's missing from it, is that it feels way less personal. It feels like it could take place in another country if you changed the actors, you know? Yeah. So when I was thinking of a continue the franchise, which is a segment of our show where we pitch a sequel, I couldn't get past the fact that it's like part of me is like, well, why don't they do like a TV show called Once Were Warriors or like a modern day remake and all these things? But it's like, knowing now that everyone felt that making the first one was like this bestowed upon burden, you know, like what does Gandalf say to Frodo in Lord of the Rings, where he's like,
"Oh, you shall not pass."
Yeah, exactly. Like that's kind of the vibe, right? Is like everyone, or the guy that wrote Lolita, how he hated writing it and threw away the manuscript dozens of times. Like, it's this painful piece of art that these people felt responsible to bring to life, and like any kind of like celebration of Once Were Warriors, I think, is tricky to navigate, because you've got to kind of like approach it with that same level of respect. And I don't think you could do a modern day remake or a TV series remake with and not like be kind of tasteless about it. So I'm curious to hear about the third book. And at this point, all I can say is the most respectful continue the franchise I could think of was, I would love to watch more like Māori cinema. I would love to like dig into like New Zealand film history a little more and like see what was born out of the wake of Once Warriors, or because I just don't like it. Has a sequel, it's pretty forgettable, so much so that they don't even mention it in this documentary, and it just feels kind of awkward that it exists now, because it just didn't have the same legacy. So yeah, what about you, or what is the future hold for Once Warriors IP?
Currently nothing in development for Once Warriors.
No.
My pitch is let's see this with a white family. You know. I mean, I think any idea I have is potentially kind of the idea of the third book. Do you know what the third book's called, or have I said it already?
I resisted looking it up because I was so curious. What first one's called What's Warriors, second one's called What Becomes of the Brokenhearted. What do they call the third one?
So this is an interesting phenomenon that I can't remember another example of it, but I know there is one of like beautiful poetic character's name in the title. The third one is called Jake's Long Shadow.
Okay.
Which I don't dislike as a title, but I know there's something else where I don't like the title of the third one as much as the other two, and I can't remember what it is.
I mean, it's not just because Jake's in the title, but the two Jakes is kind of like it doesn't feel like a natural sequel title to Chinatown, I guess.
There's
the Jake's Long Shadow.
Yeah. While you mull it over, I just on Goodreads found like the blurb of the book. It says the millennium has changed. And also, so you're worth noting this book came out just after 2000. So again, it was after What Becomes of the Brokenhearted. So it was right another book so we can make another movie, but they never made the movie.
So right. So
I don't know if it was specifically requested. That's my headcanon.
Interesting.
So the blurb for it says, the millennium has changed, but have the hickeys. Where are they now? Beth, Jake, and what of their other children? Son Abe has rejected violence, but violence finds him. Polly, as beautiful as her sister Grace, who committed suicide. Is that a hickey running around with the wealthy polo-playing Set and growing rich herself? And the gang leader, Ape Man, who killed Tanya. What's prison like? Does it change a man, grow him or not? We meet another tragic female figure, Sharnita, and Alistair Trambert, a middle-class white boy sunk into the same welfare dependency trap as the Māoris his class criticizes. Meet Charlie Bennett, Beth's husband, a fine man, and yet there's, it does say and yet twice for some reason, there's Jake Hickey casting his long shadow over everyone. Has he really grown up? I like the idea of the title, like Jake's Long Shadow, that it is this very horrible man who left this massive violence in his wake, and that he is casting the shadow over everyone. And my idea for a continue the franchise is you could use the title and Jake's dead or long since dead even, and it's like all these people that are still living with the effects of having known him or being related to him or whatever. But there's a few interesting storylines in there, like the idea of one of them running around with the wealthy polo playing Set and growing rich herself, a middle class white boy who becomes
these are all great ideas.
A lot more of the
I like Beth having a new husband. That's I'm sure that's mined for a lot of drama.
Yeah, but the idea that we have actually, because obviously it's a lot about class and stuff, but there's no in neither film do you really see kind of in the second one for a little bit, but like the juxtaposition of like, you could watch Once Warriors and be like, oh, all of New Zealand is like this, but because it's never actually put up against the people that shun them, Not saying you need to, but it's just an interesting place to go for a third film.
I agree. I think you could make this now. I think you could make it be like, well, it's set 24 or 20 years, 30 years later now. Like, just do it. Just do that. And be like, whether I mean, I feel like Temuera Morrison would do it, so probably wouldn't kill him off, as you suggested. But like, I mean, in the same way we were talking about T2 before, Trainspotting, that like maybe you could just have another attempt at what I did like about What Becomes of the Brokenhearted, which is just to check in and see what these characters would be doing now, and everyone can pretend like the second one doesn't exist.
Well, also even just the idea of like that Jake Hickey, like literally the mus, short for muscles, is like, what does he feel like? What does he go through when his body deteriorates just through aging? Like, he's a feared, very powerful man, and what happens as he ages and grows frail? I
reckon there is some common DNA between Once Were Warriors and The Godfather. I reckon you could comfortably call this New Zealand's Godfather.
Yeah, which is the sixth most popular film on Letterboxd that we've covered.
Because I think what's most interesting is like the biggest difference would not be the culture, it would be the wealth disparity. Because crucially, Jake is not a rich, he's not powerful in money. Like he is.
Well, briefly,
they are
money
like
on the
low
horses.
class. That's true. He does win some money on the horses. Well, that's what he claims anyway. But like, And so, like, I wonder if you can use the template of the Godfather sequels to, like, figure out how to keep talking in the Once Were Warriors.
Yeah. So make a
universe,
terrible third one years later.
Yeah, exactly. Terrible? You would call it terrible? Richard Linklater put it as one of his 4 faves. He's the only person who ever put The Godfather 3 in his 4 faves.
Interesting, yeah. Well, because you and I had an argument about this when we covered The Godfather, when I said it was famously bad. You were like, oh, no, it's not. And I was like, I reckon Family Feud style, name a bad sequel, 100 people would say The Godfather Part 3.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, but I think if you were to really ask them, like that TikTok meme, it's like, it is not a bad movie. It's just not as
it's just like
good, I guess.
But I would say, to use, we overuse the term famously a lot here on the Cult Popture podcast, but I think that
well, you do. I don't say it that much.
But it's like that is that film's legacy. It is famous for being inferior.
I agree.
Yeah, so that is the Jake the Muss franchise, which we're calling this episode. I don't know.
I think you got to call it Once Were Warriors and sequel, right? Like you got to put Once Were Warriors in the title.
Once and twice were warriors.
We
didn't really. You talked.
Imagine if they called the second one Twice the Warriors. Holy shit!
Up the wires. It's just a New Zealand joke for everyone. But the what do you think of the titles of the first two? We didn't really talk about it.
I think Once Were Warriors is beautiful. It's such a good. It's such a heavy. Even just those 3 words, you can kind of understand, like the regret and the sadness. Need to watch the movie. It's such a heavy title. Yeah, and the as I said 3 times already, the title bomb itself is I actually think it's probably one of my favorite title bombs I've ever heard. I think it's breathtaking, Richard. Wow. What Becomes of the Broken Hearted? I do not like questions as titles. Little fun idiosyncrasy about me. I don't think it sounds like Jake's Long Shadow sounds like it's from a different franchise. Yeah, so totally. What Becomes of the Broken Hearted sounds more like Once Were Warriors, but I think what if it was called like Becomes the Broken Hearted? Something that like how Once Were Warriors is like
a partial
half
sentence,
a sentence cut off.
Well, interesting, because What Becomes the Broken Hearted, it does have a question mark in the title, but it doesn't need to, because it's this is what becomes of the broken hearted. That's the full sentence. Yeah, but it said that it phrased it like a question. What becomes of? Anyway, time to rank that franchise.
Or like becomes the broken hearted. I don't know. Now, Beware the Kraken or something.
Yeah. So now it's time to rank that franchise over on Letterboxd, which has really been getting a lot of mentions this episode. We've got, this is the 201st film we're adding to our list of FFF rankings. And AJ, whereabouts do you think it's going to sit?
I think that Once Were Warriors as a film is better, if not comparable, to the first Speed film. And I think What Becomes of the Broken Hearted is a more has more integrity than Speed 2 Cruise Control, which tells me it is above the Speed constant. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yes. Is it better than Fubar? Another insight into a specific culture.
I think... No, I think it is not as equally balanced as Fubar.
Really?
As a franchise. I think Once Were Warriors is a much better film than
I think that's an insane thing to say. I think it's so much better than a Fubar. I don't think Fubar should be above the Speed constant.
Sorry. That's what I'm saying.
No, I think both films are better than Fubar. I think as a franchise, it's better than Fubar. You think
What Becomes of the Broken Hearted is better than... Okay, yeah, fuck it.
Yeah.
I don't care, man.
Is it better than The Mighty Ducks?
What's above Fubar? Yes.
Which, interestingly,
is better than
D2
Fubar.
The Mighty Ducks is, I think, 2 points above Once Were Warriors in our popularity. Is it better than Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy?
I mean, it's gotta... No, I reckon it's probably not, right?
Okay.
Like, in terms of...
Okay, well then, let's put it at 100th. It's a nice little neat number to put it at.
Okay, cool. Thank God. Well, thank you for listening, everybody.
Oh my
the
God,
only thing we've got to do now is... What?
Just started playing some music when I hit save, and I don't know where at all it's coming from.
If you would, if stick around and you'll hear what our next franchise is. This one's coming from the Patreon vote. And also stick around after this music ends for the music probably hasn't started yet, to be honest.
Okay, yeah.
For the post-credit
music
scene,
started playing in
it'll
my
be after our
headphones.
outro music.
But what it is, it started playing a song called Warrior by Tiffany on Spotify.
Oh my god, a New Zealand song called Warrior.
But not Benny Tiffany.
Oh, fucking hell. At least...
but
still, it made me think of a New Zealand artist.
I think that one of my Alexas must have heard me talking, started playing this song, and because I was listening to Spotify more recently on the computer rather than on an Alexa, it started playing through there. But that was terrifying.
Yeah, and are we going to reveal the kind of plans for the next couple of
yes, you can. Well, I'll pull up the
episodes?
Patreon so I can reveal what one.
So I'm going to Canada in a couple of weeks, and we kind of wanted to like pre-record episodes so that I don't have to worry about it in Canada, which does mean we cannot we got to basically decide on what the other franchises now after whatever the Patreon voted one is. And because Richard just saw it in cinemas and may as well, I guess, we thought that it would be cool to cover The Shining and Dr. Sleep. Narrowly missed out on the Halloween poll last year. So it's getting its time and it's getting its due. So the next 2 episodes of Film Franchise Fortnights will be whatever we're about to announce, and then the 2 Shining movies.
Yes. And then also there will be, normally we'd wait 2 weeks to put another Patreon poll up, but there'll be one up within the next week or so because we need an answer from you guys earlier than we normally would. Yeah. So, let me just scroll through. So we've got a couple that are tied. Has anything beaten it?
If this is our 3rd tie of the year, and probably our 4th tie ever, I'm going to be pissed off.
Well, AJ, get rid of your piss. Take it off because you're pissed off. It is a tie.
No.
It's a tie between Weekend at Bernie's and Hot Tub Time Machine. Interestingly, it was suggested saying, annoy them with Hot Tub Time Machine. Okay, I don't know. Like, yeah, whatever.
I'd happily watch Hot Tub Time Machine. I'd probably less keen to watch the Weekend at Bernie's sequel, which I'm sure is the worst film of the 4 being put on the table.
Hot Tub Time Machine 2 is pretty bad.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't seen it.
All right, what do you want to do?
But maybe I'll be fucking annoyed by it, I guess. I don't know. Do we roll a dice?
Have you got a coin?
We got in trouble last time. I've got a coin in front of me.
Oh, nice.
I've got a 10-cent coin.
Okay, so do we do head, tub, time machine, or tail? Oh, it doesn't work as well. Weekend at burn tails.
Well, weekend end being the tail of
yeah,
something.
yeah, sure, yeah.
So heads.
Well, actually, what coin?
Tails.
What's on the face of the coin?
This guy.
Oh yeah, the tiki. Oh yeah, because if it was one of our mini coins with a bird on it, we could have done Weekend at Birdies.
Well, it's kind of sweet that we're flipping a coin engraved in New Zealand imagery on the Once Warriors episode.
Yeah, and then it's going to land with the Queen's face looking at us.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to flip it. I dropped it. Should I just take what it dropped on?
Yeah, sure.
Richard, head tub time machine. That'll be devastating for Mike, who has been suggesting Weekend at Bernie's for years.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike.
Well, okay.
We'll get you on the next time.
There's something very funny has happened here, and I will cut this out if it landed on tails, but the tail is also a picture of a head.
You're so right.
AJ showed me. He was like, "Look, it's heads," and he showed me the tail side of the coin, which happens to have also a face on it.
Okay, well, no, then
Weekend at Bernie's one.
This is what Trump thinks happened. in the 2020 election. You know, this is what he thinks the fuckery. Like, this is actual tampering that I didn't do on purpose, I guess.
That's really funny.
I'm happy. Oh, let's do Weekend. I've never seen Weekend at Bernie's, so let's do it.
Yeah, Mike, for years has been insistent that it will be our new constant.
That's true. It's a little early to replace the speed constant. I think speed constant has a nice.
I think that as
the Weekend at Bernie's constant
at millennials, being millennials rather than Gen X, I think we're probably not going to like Weekend at Bernie's as much as our Gen X suggestion.
But we will cover that next weekend, Richard, as we trailblaze forth through all the 2 film franchises. I mean, we'll have to record it by next weekend, right?
Yeah.
We can record it on the weekend. That can be one of the gimmicks of it. So thank you so much for listening. Go check out Once Warriors if we made it sound like something you'd want to watch. Thank you very much. Like us on Twitter and Instagram, and join the Discord, and join the Patreon, which will include things like being able to suggest movies like Mike did with Weekend at Bernie's just there, and also give you something to talk about, something to ask us about in the post-credit scene, which is coming at you after this music ends. Ka kite, thank you very much for listening. Welcome to the post-credit scene. There's a segment at the end of each episode where if you donate $5 or more over at patreon.com/coldpopshow, you get to give us something to talk about. And this is the post-credit scene. Richard, who's it from and what is it?
Today's one comes to us from Jeremy Gascoigne, who says, as heavily bearded men, did you make a conscious decision to grow them or more an accident of fate?
An accident of fate is a very nice way of describing being a lazy slob who just doesn't shave. Because that's my answer. And I'm very blessed. A lot of fans have, over the years, have asked me what, like, my beard care, I think it's been a post-credit scene, what is your beard care technique? And truly, I occasionally get it trimmed at the barber. But, like, over the years, I have been gifted for Christmas and birthdays so many like cans of beard oil, and I just don't use them.
So where did they come in cans? For you,
like a
tin,
like Fop, Fop from Oh Brother Where Art Thou? A tin, yeah.
I'm
a Dapper Dan man. I don't want no Fop, goddammit.
Mine it's. And like an accident of fate isn't like, I don't think that's the opposite of conscious decision. Like it's a conscious decision. I like as a kid before I hit puberty, I always wanted to have a beard, like, or a mustache. Like I always just thought that would be cool, and I always hoped I could grow one. And
as long as I could remember, I always wanted to have a beard.
Yeah, beard fellas. But the
beard fellas,
because at the start of Goodfellas, he says, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be good. But it should be good beards. And when I, even in my last year of high school, I sort of stopped shaving regularly and decided to see how much facial hair growth I could get away with. My beard here is my growth actually isn't fantastic. Like you have a much more dense beard than I do. I'm keeping mine kind of short at the moment for the play that I'm in, where I need to convincingly play a 28-year-old, and I generally look older than I am. But
I think that your beard has a much nicer color to mine, though. Have I ever told you this? I've always been jealous.
Thank you. I think my beard is nicer than yours. I think I'm more attractive than you.
Yeah,
generally.
The red panda shade of ginger that shows up in your beard. I'm so jealous of it.
Yeah.
I wish I had
your.
I have like a blonde mustache. Well, one day maybe we can complete.
Yeah, I don't get 5 o'clock shadow is my big thing. So like if I go completely clean shaven, which I haven't done since you and I did Movember in 2017, it takes a while before it looks like a beard. Like whereas you get a lot more 5 o'clock shadow, which I'm very jealous of.
Yeah, I have 5 o'clock shadow the next day.
I have 5 o'clock shadow at 4 o'clock.
5 o'clock shadow. It doesn't look well, this is maybe a little a peek into my insecurities, and maybe not a fair thing to say, but from my perspective, because I've got like a double chin, I don't like how I look with 5 o'clock shadow.
Right.
I think it like emphasizes
because it's
my,
like an outline
gullet.
of the second.
Yeah,
But whereas like if you're completely
Yeah.
clean shaven, it's like it's white on white, and so it fades more.
Yeah,
but yeah, like I
exactly,
mean, speaking of insecurities, the whole reason I have a beard is because I don't like my face, and it allows me to cover half of it.
Well, because another thing as well with beards is like, if you can grow a beard, like, use that. That's kind of how I see it. It's like, I'm a short, chubby dude. I'm not as chubby as I used to be, but like, I was not dealt a particularly generous genetic hand, right? I don't think I'm like hideous or anything, but I think that because I can grow a beard, I should use that to improve my
Well,
look,
it's like
I
your
guess.
father believed that if you had an ability to do great things, it was your responsibility to do those things.
That's what my father believes.
Yes.
correct.
Yeah. Also,
Good
the
night,
other
everybody.
big thing about having a beard is that it gives you a second chance at shaping your face.
We all need that.
I'm allowed I have a much more pronounced chin and jawline.
I have a really short chin. My face like ends just below my mouth.
Yeah.
Like sooner than you'd think.
Yeah, I'd say.
And so whenever I shave, I feel like my face is too small.
Yeah, I when I'm want a short beard or I need a short beard, I do my sides quite short, but I leave a little bit of length at the bottom just so I still have a
Yeah,
chin.
of course. Oh, you got to. You've got to.